It's the fog! He rides on the fog.
The Shadowbrook legend is real. The whispers started again right before the child vanished.
He's gone! Leo is gone! Has anyone seen my son? Your grandmother, she knew the signs. She knew the secrets.
Sarah, the police are searching. We should trust them.
The fog arrived earlier than usual that night, thicker, heavier, and strangely alive. It did not drift the way ordinary mist did. It crept, curling through the hollow like a living creature, searching for something it had lost centuries ago. Sleepy Hollow had always been a quiet village, wrapped in dense forests and old, forgotten paths. But even the oldest villagers had never seen fog like this. It swallowed the moon whole, leaving the night dim and uneasy. Inside an old tavern near the crossroads, a single oil lamp flickered, as though frightened to cast its light too far. The townsfolk gathered there, speaking in hushed voices, hands trembling against wooden mugs. For the past 2 nights they had heard the same thing, the steady, deliberate pounding of hooves from the forest, even though no rider was ever seen. Horace, the eldest man in the village, finally broke the silence. He took a long drink, wiped his beard, and stared at the others, with eyes clouded by more than eyes weighted by memory. "That is no ordinary horse," he rasped. "It's a sign he has returned." A hush fell over the room. No one needed to ask who. His name had been whispered for generations, told in bedtime warnings and winter night tales. A name the villagers avoided saying too loudly, fearing it might summon him. The Headless Horseman. From the corner, a young woman named Lila folded her arms. She had grown tired of these ghost stories. "You're all being ridiculous," she scoffed. "It's just an old war tale. A legend exaggerated until you've all scared yourselves." But no one argued with her. Their eyes stayed fixed on the windows, where fog pressed its cold face against the glass. Outside, the world felt unnervingly still. Not a single leaf rustled. Not a breath of wind stirred the trees. The hollow seemed poised in a moment of suspended dread, as though the forest itself was listening. A lone lantern hung from a post on the dirt road, its flame weakened by the suffocating fog. It swayed, though there was no wind to move it. Then came the sound, clack, clack, slow, heavy, rhythmic hooves. The villagers froze. Their breath hitched, as if the noise had crawled directly into their chests. "He's circling again," someone whispered. The sound did not approach. Instead, it traveled along the outer edge of the village steady, watchful like a predator, tracing the perimeter of its prey. The fog shifted in tandem with the hoofbeats, thickening wherever the unseen rider went. Elias, a young hunter known for his fearlessness, swallowed hard. "I need to see what it is," he said. "It could be a wild animal, or a stray horse." "Don't," several people urged. But he stepped outside anyway. The air hit him like ice. His breath came out in pale clouds, though it wasn't cold enough for that. He walked toward the lantern post. The light barely pierced more than a foot into the fog. Then he saw them, the tracks. Hoofprints burned lightly into the dirt, glowing with a faint ember-red heat, as though the ground itself had been scorched. The prints formed a circle around the entire village, like a boundary drawn with fire. Elias knelt and touched the soil. It was still warm to warm. "Whatever it was," he murmured, "it just passed." The fog parted suddenly, shifting with unnatural intent. A narrow path opened in front of him like a curtain being drawn aside. In that path stood a silhouette, tall, rigid, mounted upon a horse so dark, its coat seemed to absorb the light. Its muscles rippled like shadows given form. But it was not the horse that stole Ilias's breath, which was the rider. Or rather, the absence of what should have been there, where a head should have rested on the rider's broad shoulders. There was only swirling black smoke, flickering with embers like dying coals. The air around it warped with heat. Yet the figure moved not an inch. It sat perfectly still upon its mount. But Elias felt the gaze. A cold, penetrating stare that seemed to pierce straight into his chest, despite the creature's lack of eyes. A primal terror, one older than the hollow itself, seized him. His muscles locked, his breath stuttered. From inside the tavern came a sharp scream, Lila's voice, breaking the silence like shattering glass. At the sound, the horseman moved. He turned his mount in a single, smooth motion. The fog surged around him, curling like smoke drawn into a flame. The horse stamped once, and then without a sound of departure, the figure vanished into the fog. Elias stumbled back into the tavern. Faces turned toward him, pale and trembling. "What did you see?" Horace demanded, though fear already gleamed in his eyes. Elias's mouth felt dry as dust. Words struggled to form. Finally, in a whisper barely louder than breath, he answered, "The legend is real. He's back." And from that moment on, the people of Sleepy Hollow understood one truth: they were no longer living in the quiet shadow of a myth. The curse that should have died with an old war had awakened again, and their nights would never be the same. The tavern remained silent long after Elias delivered his trembling confession. The villagers exchanged fearful glances, whispering prayers under their breath. But Horace, who had lived long enough to hear every version of the tale, closed his eyes with a look of grim acceptance. He knew that the appearance of the horseman was never random. His return meant something had stirred, the past awake. And the past of Sleepy Hollow was stained with betrayal. Horace motioned for everyone to gather closer. Even Lila, who had always mocked legends, took a hesitant seat. Elias leaned against the wall, still pale. The fog pressed against the windows like a watching presence. Horace began his tale in a low voice. "Before any of you were born, before your parents, or their parents, ever walked this earth, Sleepy Hollow was not the quiet place you know today." The fire flickered, as though leaning in to listen. The soldier who refused to die during the American Revolutionary War. The Hollow was a strategic path between contested territories. One cold autumn morning, a regiment of Hessian mercenaries rode through the valley, their foreign banners cutting through the mist. Among them was one soldier, feared even by his own comrade Stahl, ruthless, unbreakable. His real name had been lost to time. The villagers never knew it. They simply called him the Hessian. He was unmatched with a blade, but also known for his coldness. Children cried when he passed. Dogs hid. Even seasoned soldiers lowered their voices when speaking of him. He fought not out of loyalty, but out of something deeper, something darker. Some said he carried a hunger for chaos. Others whispered that death could not touch him. But war spares no one forever. Late in the war, a band of colonial scouts ambushed the Hessians near the Hollow. The battle raged through the trees, arrows flying like angry spirits. In the chaos, the Hessian's horse was struck, throwing him to the ground. He rose instantly, eyes burning with fury, but before he could mount a counterattack, a cannon blast roared through the forest. It struck him directly. His head was torn from his shoulders. And yet what horrified the soldiers who witnessed it was not his death, but what happened after. The body did not fall. It remained standing for several seconds, swaying slightly as though confused by the loss. When it finally collapsed, the earth trembled beneath it. His comrades fled. His enemies fled faster. No one dared approach the corpse. The colonials buried the head in a shallow grave on a hill the villagers would later call Death's Rise, hoping to hide the horror forever. The body, taken by the Hessians in fear, disappeared into the fog. Some claimed they burned it. Others said they abandoned it at the edge of the forest. But the truth was simpler. The body never stopped moving. The curse that should never have been. After the war, Horace continued, strange things began happening around the Hollow. At first, livestock vanished. Then travelers reported hearing hoofbeats chasing them through the night. The ground trembled with unseen movement. And eventually, people disappeared too. Villagers claimed they saw a rider without a head, galloping through the trees, searching, hunting. The elders believed the Hessian was bound by fury so intense, so consuming, that death itself could not extinguish it. His spirit roamed the land blindly, seeking the one thing stolen from him, his head. And that, Horace said, is why his curse returned tonight. Elias felt a cold sweat slide down his neck. You mean, something disturbed his grave? Horace nodded grimly. or someone. All eyes slowly turned toward the window, toward the fog that pulsed like a living heartbeat. The betrayal that fueled the legend, but the villagers knew only half the truth. Because the Hessian's curse was not born solely from violence, it was born from betrayal. Though hired as a mercenary, the Hessian had been promised safe passage through the valley by a local landowner. A secret pact, never recorded, never spoken aloud, had ensured he and his unit would not be ambushed. But greed runs deeper than loyalty. The landowner, desperate to gain favor with the colonials, revealed the Hessian's route in exchange for gold and protection. The ambush that severed the Hessian's head was a direct result of that betrayal, and the landowner's family paid the price. Within a fortnight, every member of his household vanished, leaving only scorch marks on the floors and deep gouges in the doors, as though clawed by iron. The village buried the story. They burned the house to hide the truth. But curses do not die with silence. They wait. They remember. Why the horseman returned, Horace finished with a voice barely more than a whisper. The Headless Horseman returns only when something disturbs the balance. A stolen grave. A broken promise. A lie uncovered. Leela swallowed hard. But why now? Why tonight? Horace's eyes drifted to the fog, where a faint flicker of reddish light pulsed in the distance, like embers glowing in a hollow neck. Because, he said, his rage has awakened again. Something has called him back, and once he rises, he does not rest until he finds what he lost. Outside, the hoofbeats began again, slow, heavy, approaching. The villagers held their breath as the fog swallowed the lantern's light. The legend was not just returning, it was hungry. The hoofbeats faded eventually, swallowed by the restless fog. But Sleepy Hollow did not dare breathe until long after the echo vanished. Inside the tavern, fear hung thick in the air. Fear sharpened by the story Horace had just revealed. The Hessian's betrayal, his violent end, the curse that refused to die. It all felt closer now, as if the past itself was creeping back toward them through the trees. Elias stood at the window, staring into the pale swirl of mist. Most people saw only fog, but he saw movement, a shifting, slow pulse. As if the woods were breathing. Lila stepped beside him, uncharacteristically quiet. "If what Horace said is true," she whispered, "then someone must have disturbed the grave." Elias didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the dark outline of the western woods, part of the forest so ancient that even the bravest hunters avoided it. If anything unholy was happening, it would be there. Horace finally broke the silence. "There's more to this curse than a headless rider," he said. "There was a pact made in the western woods, long ago, a pact meant to contain the Hessian's rage. If someone tampered with that, the horseman would awaken." The villagers stiffened. "A pact?" Elias asked. "What kind of pact?" Horace leaned heavily on his cane, his eyes dimming as the memory came flooding back. One forged in fear, one never meant to be broken. The Witch of the Western Woods, long before Sleepy Hollow became a village. The Western Woods were home to a woman known only as the Witch of the Vale. She lived deep within the forest, hidden behind moss-covered stones and twisted branches that formed a natural barrier. Some said she could command the fog. Others believed she could speak to the dead. All agreed she must never be angered. When the Hessian first rose, after death headless, furious, unstoppably, it was the witch who stopped him. Horace's voice turned almost reverent. "She confronted the rider in the woods," he said. "No one else dared approach him. The Hessian attacked her, but she stood her ground, and in exchange for sparing the hollow, she offered him a pact." "What kind of pact?" Lila asked. "A promise sealed with blood," Horace replied. "She bound his spirit to the place where he lost his head. As long as his grave remained untouched, he would sleep. And if someone disturbed it," Elias murmured, "he would wake," Horace finished. "And his rage would be greater than before." The tavern fell silent. Outside, the fog thickened, creeping closer like a tide of white ghosts. The recent disturbance, Elias's mind spun. So someone must have gone into the western woods. Not someone. A voice croaked from the doorway. Everyone turned sharply. It was Mavith, the old herbalist, who lived on the outskirts of the village. Her hair hung in tangled strands, her eyes clouded with secrets. She stepped into the tavern, closing the door against the fog with trembling fingers. I've seen footprints, Maeve whispered. Fresh ones. Leading to the witch's altar. A cold dread crawled up Elias's spine, who Maeve swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. A group of strangers, cloaked. They carried lanterns that flickered with black flame. Horace's eyes widened. Black flame, oh no. You know who they are? Lila asked. Horace nodded slowly, reluctantly. Years ago, outsiders came seeking the horseman's power. They believed his spirit could be controlled, used as a weapon. They failed, but they left behind followers. Fanatics who worshipped the Hessian's curse. Maeve's voice cracked. They're back. And they went into the western woods at dusk. Elias stepped forward. What did they do? Maeve met his eyes with a mixture of fear and certainty. They broke the pact. The room froze. The shattered barrier. Maeve explained what she had seen earlier that evening. Robed figures gathered around the altar of the Witch of the Vale, chanting in a language older than the war, older than the hollow itself. They pried open the earth where the pact had been sealed. They spilled oil that glowed like dying stars. And worst of all, they shattered the stone sigil that had anchored the Hessian spirit. When the sigil broke, Maeve whispered. The fog rose like a scream. The timing matched perfectly. That was when Elias heard the first hoofbeat. That was when the horseman circled the village. He had been freed, not by accident, by intention. A warning from the woods, the tavern trembled suddenly. Just a faint vibration at first. Cups rattled. The lantern flame quivered. Elias pressed his ear to the wall. Hoofbeats. Slow, dragging, heavy. But this time, they weren't circling. They were approaching. The villagers panicked, rushing away from the windows. Elias remained still, muscles tight, listening. The hoofbeats halted right at the edge of the western woods. Silence followed, thick, unnatural. Then, a whisper drifted through the fog, not a voice. A sound like dry leaves brushing stone. Elias strained to hear. Lila stepped back in fear. The whisper repeated. This time it formed a word. Return, Maeve gasped. It's the witch's voice. She's trying to warn us. Horace staggered forward. If the witch's spirit is awake, then the curse is fully unleashed. Outside, the fog swirled violently, parting just enough for a glimpse of something towering, motionless. Watching from the trees, a shadow astride a massive horse, its neck burning with ember-red smoke. The horseman, waiting, not for a kill, but for something lost, something taken. And when he found it, nothing in Sleepy Hollow would survive his wrath. The fog that had once merely hovered at the edges of Sleepy Hollow now surged inward like a living tide. It pressed against the tavern walls, curling through the cracks around the windows, dimming the lanterns until their flames struggled to exist. What had started as a veil had become an invader. Elias stared at the window, heart hammering. The horseman still lingered somewhere near the edge of the western woods, waiting, watching, burning with rage, awakened by a shattered pact. But the fog had its own purpose. And it was closing in. Maeve clutched the table for support, her knuckles white. This is not normal fog, she whispered. It's S. The witch. S fogged. Same mist she used to bind the Hessian all those years ago. Then why is it coming here? Lila asked, stepping back as the fog writhed against the glass like a pale hand. Horace's expression deepened with grim clarity. Because the pact is broken. The witch's power, her warnings, her protections, they've all been set loose. And without the sigil to guide it, her magic is wandering blindly. The realization sank in with a weight no one wanted to bear. The fog was no longer a guardian. It was a force unbound. The fog takes form. A sudden gust of cold wind slipped under the tavern door. The lamps flickered out for a moment, plunging the room into near darkness. Elias instinctively reached for a lantern and relit it, but the flame shivered violently. Then the fog seeped through the cracks in thin, snaking threads curling along the floorboards, climbing the walls like ghostly vines. The villagers gasped and stumbled back. But Elias stood still, because he recognized something in the way the mist moved. It wasn't random. It was searching. The fog pulled together in the corner of the room, thickening until it formed the outline of a shaped hole, robed, faceless except for two hollow impressions where eyes should have been. Lila choked on a scream. What is that? Maeve dropped to her knees, eyes wide with recognition. A spirit echo, she breathed. A fragment of the witch herself. The shape turned toward her, its head tilting in a way that suggested both memory and mourning. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of wind dragging across fallen leaves, bound, broken. Elias felt every hair on his body stand. It's trying to warn us. The fog figure raised an arm long thin, and wavering like smoke hand pointed toward the western woods. Then, with a voice that trembled like ancient wood splitting, it whispered, "Return." What was taken? Before anyone could respond, the figure dissolved, scattering like dust into the swirling mist. And the fog surged stronger than before. The fog devours the hollow. Sleepy Hollow descended into chaos. The villagers rushed from the tavern, desperate to reach their homes, their children, their safe places. But outside, the fog was no longer air, it was a wall. It swallowed paths, drowned lanterns, muffled voices. Even the familiar landmarks of the village vanished behind its white curtain. Lila clutched Ilias's arm as they stepped outside. "I can't see anything, Ilias. Where are the houses?" Ilias strained his eyes. Through the thick fog, the world had melted into silhouettes and shadows. The wind carried whispers, some faint, some sharp, some sounding eerily like names being called. Horace limped forward, his cane tapping the ground in frantic rhythm. "Do not follow the voices. They lead to the horsemen." Maeve gathered branches and lit them, creating a makeshift torch. The flame fought to stay alive against the damp air. "We need to get to the hill," Maeve said. "Death's Rise. That's where the Hessian's head was buried. If someone took it, Tiff, those cultists stole it. We need to bring it back, before he finds it first." Lila swallowed. "And if he finds it before we do?" Horace's silence was the only answer needed. The fog's memory, they began their ascent toward the outskirts of the village, the fog tightening around them like a trap. Elias stayed at the front, torch in hand, guiding the group along the familiar path that now felt foreign and distorted. The fog thickened with every step, swirling in patterned spirals, circles, quick jerks, like it was reliving old memories. Then Elias heard it, a sound hidden inside the mist. A woman's voice, calm and ancient. "Turn back," Maeve stiffened. "The witch." But Elias shook his head. "No. That's not a warning, it's regret." Lila grabbed his sleeve. "Why regret?" Elias didn't answer. Because the fog around them suddenly shifted, revealing a vision, like a flicker of the past bleeding through the present. They saw the witch standing before the Hessian, decades ago, her hands raised as she bound him to the land. The fog swirled thick around them, solidifying into chains of mist that wrapped around the headless warrior's form. The Hessian fought, his horse rearing wildly, but the witch forced the spirit down until he was swallowed by the earth. The vision faded. The fog returned. Maeve trembled. "Her magic is showing us what she did. She's showing us why the pact was created." Horace's voice shook. "And why breaking it is unforgivable." Approaching Death's Rise as they reached the border between the village and the western woods. The fog shifted again, this time violently. It roared like a living storm, coils of mist whipping through the air and clawing at the ground. And over that roaring, Elias heard it, the hoofbeats slow, heavy. Drawing closer, the horseman was moving, not wandering, not searching. He was following the fog. The earth trembled beneath Elias's feet. He turned toward the woods, and there, shrouded but unmistakable, stood the dark silhouette. A burning neck, a towering mount, a rider without a head. The horseman paused, the fog circling him like a crown. He was waiting. Maeve's torch flickered wildly. "He's drawn to the pack's ruins, to the broken magic, to what's missing," Lila whispered, his head. Elias inhaled deeply. Then the horseman lifted a hand slowly, commandingly. The fog parted at once, forming a clear path that led deeper into the western woods. A command from the dead, a summons. The horseman wanted them to follow, or perhaps he wanted to hunt them once they entered. Elias stepped forward anyway, because somewhere in those cursed woods lay the truth behind the broken pact, and the stolen head that could unleash the horseman's full wrath upon Sleepy Hollow. And the fog was no longer just returning. It was leading them into the darkness where the curse had awakened. The emergency bell of Sleepy Hollow rang only once before the entire village froze. It echoed through the streets like a metallic scream, slicing through the fog that had rolled in thicker than ever. The sound came from the blacksmith's shop, normally a place of warmth, fire, and the rhythmic clang of iron. But tonight, only silence followed the bell, an absence so sharp it made the villagers' skin crawl. Horace, Elias, and Lila reached the forge at the same moment as several others. The door was wide open, the lanterns inside still burning, but the room was eerily empty. The air smelled faintly of smoke and cold metal. "Master Rowan," Elias called out, stepping inside. "Rowan." No answer. Instead, they found Rowan's hammer lying in the center of the floor, something the blacksmith never left behind. And next to it, half buried in the soot, was a small wooden toy horse. The villagers exchanged looks of dread. It belonged to Tomas, the blacksmith's only child. Horace bent down, picking up the toy with trembling fingers. "This isn't good," he muttered. "Rowan would never leave Tomas alone, and Tomas, he never wanders at night." Lila moved closer to the forge's open back door. "There are footprints," she whispered. "Small ones. Tomas's size." They all leaned in. The small footprints led into the fog straight toward the western woods. But what froze their breath was the second set of prints beside them. Hoofprints. Deep, heavy, burning faintly at the edges as though seared into the ground by heat. The same marks Elias had seen in the road, the horseman's trail. The vanishing, they followed the tracks cautiously, lanterns held high. But the deeper they went, the colder the air became. The fog grew heavier, almost sticky, clinging to their skin like wet cloth. Even the lantern flames struggled to stay lit, dancing wildly with each breath of unnatural wind. Horace muttered, "This fog, it's the same as the night of the last awakening, and the night of the pact." Lila looked at him sharply. "The forest pact, the one Rowan's ancestor made." Horace nodded grimly. "The horseman doesn't hunt blindly. He hunts those bound to him, those who owe him something." "Are you saying Tomas is in danger because of something that happened generations ago?" Elias asked, his voice tight. "Curses don't fade," Horace said. "They collect interest." Suddenly, Lila stopped walking. "Wait, listen." At first they heard nothing. Then a faint clinking sound, like iron brushing against iron. Slow, rhythmic. It grew louder as they approached a small clearing. Rowan was there. The blacksmith stood in the center of the fog-drenched clearing, his eyes wide with terror, his hands shaking violently as he held a broken iron chain. He looked like a man who had run for his life and lost half of it along the way. "Rowan!" Elias shouted. "Where's Tomas?" Rowan swallowed, but no words came, only trembling. Lila put a hand on his shoulder. "Rowan, what happened?" His voice cracked. He was taken." Silence spread like frost. "Taken by who?" Elias whispered, though the answer was already sinking like a stone in his chest. Rowan lifted a shaking hand and pointed behind them toward the fog, toward the sound of distant hoofbeats. "The horseman," Rowan choked out. "He came for my son." The chain of old debts. Horace took the broken chain from Rowan's hands. It was old, ancient, even its iron darkened with age and something else. Symbols etched into the metal, almost runic, glowing faintly like dying embers. "This is Hessian iron," Horace murmured. "Forged during the war." "Why do you have this?" Rowan shook his head, miserably. "It's been in my family for generations, passed down from my great-grandfather. He told us never to break it, never to let it be undone." Horace's face darkened. "It was a binding chain. Your ancestor wasn't just a witness to the Hessian's death. He helped bury the head. This chain was meant to keep the horseman's spirit from rising." Lila's eyes widened. "And now that chain is broken." Rowan nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Tomas found it in my workshop. He didn't know what it was. He was just a child. He pulled it apart while playing." His breath hitched. The moment it snapped, the fog came. The truth fell on them like a stone-crushing bone. The curse had been broken. The horseman's seal was undone. The path of hoofprints. Horace lifted the lantern higher. "If the horseman took Tomas, he didn't kill him, not yet. The horseman only seeks one thing, his head," Elias said. "And he believes Tomas can help him find it," Horace finished. Lila panicked. grabbed Rowan by the shoulders. Where would the horseman take him? Where does he go when he rises? Rowan whispered the answer they all feared. Death's Rise. The hill where the Hessian's head was buried, or worse, where it had been stolen. Before they could speak again, a new sound cut through the clearing. A child's scream, Tomas. It came from deep within the fog. The lanterns flickered. The hoofbeats grew louder, approaching fast, thundering like a storm. Rowan dropped to his knees. Elias clenched his jaw. Lila held her breath, and Horace whispered, with grim certainty, "The horseman has him." The fog twisted violently. The forest trembled, and somewhere ahead, the Headless Horseman rode with a child trapped in his merciless grasp. The forest trembled long after Tomas's scream faded into the suffocating fog. Elias, Lila, Horace, and Rowan stood frozen in the clearing, each of them feeling the weight of an ancient evil closing in. The hoofbeats grew faint again, moving deeper, toward Death's Rise. The path forward seemed swallowed by a living darkness. "We can't outrun him," Rowan whispered, still shaking. "We can't fight him. How do we save my son?" Horace lowered his lantern. "We can't defeat the horseman with steel or courage. We need the one person who knows the truth behind his curse." Lila's breath caught. "You mean her?" Horace nodded slowly. "The old witch of the western woods. She helped bind the Hessian's spirit the first time. And she's the only one who might know how to stop him now." Rowan paled. "She hasn't been seen in years. People say she's dead." "No," Horace said firmly. "Witches like her don't die. They wait." Without another word, they moved into the deeper forest toward the witch's hidden dwelling. The fog thickened as though trying to block their way, whispering faint voices between the trees. Branches creaked and twisted overhead like skeletal fingers. The lantern's light grew weaker with each step. Elias felt something brush against his arm. It wasn't wind. It felt like a hand. "Don't stop," Horace urged quietly. "She lives where the fog is oldest." The witch's shrouded hut after nearly an hour of tense silence and winding paths. They reached a small clearing. At its center stood a crooked wooden hut draped in thorny vines, its roof sagging as though burdened by centuries of secrets. A single lantern hung by the door, its light unnaturally still and moving despite the wind. Elias swallowed hard. "She lives here." "Lives is a strong word," Horace murmured. "Exists is closer." Rowan stepped forward, desperation replacing fear. He knocked on the warped wooden door. At first, nothing happened. Then a soft scraping sound came from inside. The door creaked open. The witch stood before them. Her spine was bent like a withered tree, her eyes glowing faintly beneath a hood so tattered it looked eaten by time. Long strands of silver hair spilled out like threads of moonlight. Her voice was a whisper that seemed to come from the trees themselves. "You broke the chain," she said. Rowan staggered. I didn't mean to. It was my son. I know who snapped it." Her eyes pierced into him like cold needles. "A child's hand does not break ancient iron by accident." The curse was calling to him. Elias shivered. Why would the horseman call to Tomas? The witch stepped aside. "Come in. The fog listens when you speak too loudly." They entered the hut, where dried herbs hung from the ceiling, and strange runes glowed faintly on the walls. A cauldron sat in the corner, bubbling with something dark as ink. The air hummed with unseen energy. "Tell us what we must do," Rowan pleaded. "He took my son. Please." The witch slowly lowered herself onto a crooked stool. "He took your child because the Hessian spirit remembers your bloodline. Your ancestor helped bury his head. But that story is incomplete." Lila leaned forward. "Incomplete, how?" The witch lifted a bone-carved staff and pressed it into the dirt floor. The entire hut seemed to inhale. "Your ancestor did not just bury the Hessian's head," she said coldly. "He bound it to the land with my help." Rowan frowned. "Bound it, why?" "Because the horseman did not die cleanly," she explained. "His rage was too great. Death rejected him. His spirit rose before his body cooled. Without the binding, he would have slaughtered everything in the valley." Elias felt a chill creep up his spine. "So the chain kept him from rising." "It kept him from rising fully," she corrected. "The chain restrained his power. But now that it's broken, he is almost whole again." and he cannot become whole without one final piece. Horace closed his eyes, his head. The witch nodded. The horseman senses its location, but cannot retrieve it alone. He needs the hands of the living. Rowan gripped the edge of the table, so he took Tomas to dig it up. No. Her voice lowered to a deadly whisper. He took Tomas because your ancestor made a pact of blood. The Hessian's head was buried by your family's hands, and it must be unearthed by the same bloodline, Lila gasped. Tomas is the only one who can release the head, and once the head is free, the witch said, the horseman becomes unstoppable. The witch's revelation, Rowan collapsed onto a stool, horror etched into his face. What do we do? How do we stop him? The witch tapped her staff again. A ripple of dark light moved across the floor, forming a symbol of intertwined roots in flame. There is only one way, she said. The curse must be reversed. Elias stepped closer. How? She looked at each of them slowly. You must reach Death's Rise before the child unearths the head. If the horseman gains it, all of Sleepy Hollow and every soul tied to its history will be lost to the eternal hunt. Leela clenched her fists. Then tell us how to stop him. The witch leaned forward, her face shadowed. You cannot kill the horseman. Rowan's hope shattered. But, she continued, you can bind him again. How? Horace asked. The witch lifted a small black box from a shelf. It was carved from obsidian, sealed with iron bands. Something thrashed inside, something that rattled the box from within. This is the heart of the curse. The binding core. If you carry it to Death's Rise, and place it upon the grave before Tomas reaches the head, the horseman will be forced back into the earth. Elias swallowed. And if we fail, the witch answered without hesitation. Then the head will rise. The horseman will reclaim what is his, and Sleepy Hollow will be the first to fall. But not the last. She handed the box to Rowan. Go. The fog grows thicker. Your time is almost gone. Outside, the thunder of hoofbeats shook the earth. The horseman was close. And Tomas's fate hung by a single breath. The witch's hut vanished behind them, as though swallowed by the forest itself. The moment Rowan stepped outside, holding the obsidian binding box, the fog recoiled downly to surge forward again with twice its weight, as if trying to smother their path before they could even begin. The trees loomed taller, bending slightly as though watching them pass. Stay close, Horace warned, gripping his lantern. The horseman won't let us reach the hill easily. The earth trembled under distant hoofbeats that rolled like thunder's angry echo. Rowan clutched the box to his chest. His hand shook, but his expression had sharpened into something fiercer. Father's terror twisted into absolute resolve. Tomas is alive, Rowan said. I can feel it. I won't let that monster keep him. No one's leaving him behind, Elias said firmly, though his voice trembled. The four pushed forward through the dense forest. The path to Death's Rise was never a friendly one. Even in daylight, few dared tread it. Tonight, under the cursed fog, the forest seemed alive, breathing, shifting, whispering warnings, too soft to discern, but too heavy to ignore. The forest that remembers. Branches snapped under their boots, but sometimes, just sometimes, they snapped without anyone touching them. Blackbirds burst from treetops in chaotic spirals. Unseen shadows darted between trunks, moving faster than any animal. Lila slowed. There's something following us. We know what's following us, Elias muttered. No, she whispered. Something else. As if to confirm her fear, a low groan echoed through the woods. Not human, not animal, something older. The trees themselves seemed to shift away from its source. Horace tensed. The forest remembers the Hessian's death. And it remembers the curse. Everything bound to this land is stirring again. Rowan's voice cracked. Let them stir. Let them howl, just bring me to my boy. They pressed on. Crossing the split path at last, they reached a fork in the trail, two narrow paths widening in opposite directions, both disappearing into thick, swirling fog. Horace lifted his lantern. This wasn't here before. Elias frowned. Which way leads to Death's Rise? The lantern flickered violently, its flame stretching sideways, as though tugged. The fog swirled unnaturally, toward the left path, thickening like an invisible wall. That's a warning, Lila whispered. The forest is telling us not to go that way, or it's leading us into a trap, Elias countered. Horace closed his eyes, remembering old tales. The horseman manipulates the fog. The witch said the forest still resists him. One path is his doing. One path is the forest's. Rowan clenched the box. We don't have time for riddles. He took a step, toward the right path, but the ground trembled violently beneath them, and a blood-chilling scream echoed from the left. A child's scream, Tomas. Rowan bolted forward. Rowan, wait, Elias shouted. But a father cannot be held by caution when his child's voice cries in the dark. They chased after him into the left path, lanterns shaking in their hands. The fog thickened instantly, swallowing the moonlight and smothering color from the world. The air grew colder, too coldened. The trees bent unnaturally toward them like ribs pulling inward. Stay close, Horace shouted, his voice muffled as though wrapped in cloth. Shapes moved in the mist, too tall, too thin, flickering like shadows without bodies. Whispering voices swirled around them, speaking in a language older than the village itself. Don't listen to it, Lila said through clenched teeth. It's the curse. It twists the fog into illusions. But one whisper cut through the rest, sharp and unmistakable. Father. Rowan froze. Tomas. The whisper turned into a cry of pain. Rowan sprinted forward. Elias lunged to grab him, but something slammed into his chest, a gust of wind, a spectral hand. Whatever it was, it sent him sprawling to the ground. Rowan, stop, Lila screamed, struggling to reach him through the fog. But Rowan was gone, lost in white. Horace staggered forward. The horseman is playing with him. He wants Rowan to bring the binding box closer to the hill. Elias got back on his feet, panting. We can't lose him. We can't lose Tomas. We won't, Horace said. Follow the sound, but listen for what's real. How do we know? Lila demanded. Horace's eyes hardened. The real Tomas is breathing. Terrified, alive. Illusions don't breathe. With no other choice, they forced themselves deeper. Each step weighted with dread. The edge of Death's Rise finally, the fog thinned just enough to reveal the silhouette of a hill ahead, a jagged outline, a place where the trees refused to grow. Death's Rise. Rowan stood at its base, clutching the binding box, staring upward as though entranced. Elias, Lila, and Horace ran toward him. Rowan, Elias grabbed his arm. Why did you run off like that? Rowan looked at him with haunted eyes. He called to me. Tomas called to me. No, Horace said sharply. That wasn't Tomas. It was the horseman. Rowan's breath hitched. But I heard. You heard what he wanted you to hear, Horace interrupted. The closer we get to the hill, the stronger his illusions become. Lila pointed upward. At the top of Death's Rise, silhouetted against the swirling fog, stood the Headless Horseman. His burning neck seethed like a furnace, and in his arm he held the struggling form of a small child. Tomas. Rowan fell to his knees. My son. The horseman didn't move. He simply watched them headless, but aware his horse pawing at the ground with molten fury. The witch's warning echoed in their minds. If he reaches the head before you place the binding box, all is lost. Horace stepped forward, gripping the lantern. This is our final climb, and the horseman knows it, Elias added. The fog curled around their ankles like living chains. Rowan clutched the obsidian box. Lila took his hand. Elias steadied his breath. Horace lifted the lantern so high, it almost broke. Together, they began the ascent toward Death's Rise, and at the top, waiting like a nightmare carved from flame and shadow, was the Headless Horseman and the child whose life held the fate of the Hollow. The moment they set foot on the slope of Death's Rise, the forest behind them erupted with a roar of wind and snapping branches. The fog surged like a living creature, swirling violently around the hill, as though sealing them inside a vast, choking dome. Lantern light flickered, barely pushing back the darkness that thickened with every heartbeat. At the summit, the Headless Horseman tightened his grip on Tomas. The child fought back with trembling, frantic movements, small feet kicking, fists flailing, but the Hessian held him as easily as a rag doll. Rowan took a step forward. Tomas, hold on, son. I'm here. The horseman turned his faceless gaze toward Rowan, the cavity above his shoulders burning brighter, molten, and furious. He lifted his sword, a jagged, flame-edged blade forged in death, and pointed it down the hill. It was not a warning. It was an invitation. A hunt had begun. The first charge, the horseman's mount reared, hooves striking sparks against the earth. A split second later, it launched downward with impossible speed. The ground shook under the crushing force of its charge. "Scatter!" Horace shouted. They dove aside as the horseman thundered past, slicing the air with his blade. The strike missed Rowan by inches but cut through a boulder behind him, splitting it in half as though it were soft clay. "The hill isn't safe," Elias cried. "He's trying to knock us back to stop us from reaching the grave." Rowan clutched the obsidian binding box to his chest. "We keep going. Tomas is up there. I'm not leaving him." The horseman wheeled around with terrifying precision and prepared to charge again, hooves slamming the earth like drumbeats of doom. The fog turns alive. The fog thickened, coiling around their legs, pulling them down. It was no longer misted, behaved like hands, grasping, twisting, dragging them backward. "It's not natural fog anymore," Lila gasped, struggling to pull free. "It's the curse. He's forcing the entire hill against us." Horace grabbed her arm. "Keep moving." The witch said the binding only works at the grave. But the horseman charged again, this time aiming directly for Elias. Elias felt the ground, trembled beneath him, and barely rolled aside before the blade crashed into the soil where he just stood. The explosion of dirt and sparks blinded him momentarily. "He's hurting us," Elias hissed, wiping blood from his cheek. "He wants Rowan to be the last one standing. He wants the box. And he'll kill anyone who's not necessary," Horace added grimly. The fog shifted again, forming shapes, silhouettes of soldiers without faces, rising from the earth like memories turned violent. They reached for the living with cold, skeletal fingers. The fallen Hessians, Lila whispered in terror. "He's calling the dead." Rowan swung his lantern wildly. "Get away from us." The ghosts shrieked but dissolved under the light, yet only temporarily. As soon as the lantern passed, they reformed, drawn by the horseman's rage. "The desperate push-ups the hill up," Elias shouted. "We have to climb while he's summoning." They darted up the slope, slipping on loose dirt and gnarled roots. The horseman slammed his sword into the ground, sending a shockwave of fire racing across the hill. "Down!" Horace yelled. They dropped just as the flaming arc skimmed above their heads, scorching the trees behind them. Rowan felt the heat sear his back but kept crawling forward, clutching the binding box like a lifeline. "Tomas!" he cried again. This time, the child's voice answered faintly. "Father!" Rowan's heart nearly burst. "I'm coming, Tomas. Hold on." Hearing him, Tomas twisted harder in the horseman's grip, shouting, "Let me go." The Hessian jerked the boy closer, tightening his hold. The flames around his neck flared in agitation. "He's getting impatient," Elias said breathlessly. "He knows we're close." Then the horseman charged once more, this time not down the hill but across it, sweeping the slope with lethal force to cut off their path. "Move right," Horace commanded. They scrambled sideways just before the blade carved a burning line into the earth. Rowan tripped, but Lila grabbed his arm, hauling him upright. "You drop that box," she warned, "and we're all dead." Rowan nodded, swallowing panic. The witch's warning echoes as they neared the crest. The fog grew thinner, not weaker, but more focused, condensing like a tunnel, forcing them toward a single point. At its end lay a large mound of dirt, ringed by dead roots and cracked stones. The Hessian's grave. And at its side lay a circular depression freshly disturbed, earth loosened, as though something beneath had stirred. "The head," Horace whispered. "It's so close to waking." The witch's words returned like a cold wind. "Place the binding box upon the grave before the child unearths the head." But Tomas was still in the horseman's, grip held just feet away from the grave itself. "How do we get to them?" Elias asked. Rowan stared upward, eyes burning with fatherly fury. "We don't have to fight the horseman. We only need one chance. One opening." "And if he doesn't give it?" Lila asked. Rowan closed his eyes. "Then we make one." The final charge begins. A deafening roar split the air as the horseman raised his sword high, flames trailing in a long arc behind him. His horse pawed at the ground with molten hooves, gouging trenches of smoke and ash. "He's preparing the death charge," Horace said, voice shaking. "If he hits us now, we're done." Elias drew a sharp breath. "Then we stand our ground." "No," Rowan said, stepping forward. "I do." Before they could stop him, Rowan walked toward the center of the hill, binding box clutched tightly. "Hey!" he shouted at the horseman. "Come for me." The horseman snapped his headless gaze toward Rowan, fire bursting from his neck. He accepted the challenge. He lowered his sword. The horse dug in. The hill quaked, and then the headless horseman charged. Rowan braced himself, feet planted, heart pounding. He knew he wouldn't survive the hit, but if he could just hold the horseman's attention long enough. Tomas screamed his father's name. Elias and Lila prepared to flank. Horace raised the lantern high, ready to blind the monster for a split second. All of Sleepy Hollow hung in that breath. The midnight hunt had reached its peak, and death was galloping straight toward them. The moon hung low above Sleepy Hollow, swollen and pale, like an omen left behind by the heavens. The wind had shifted, no longer merely cold, but sharp, laced with the metallic scent of something old and vengeful, stirred awake. Elmira, Elias, and the trembling young apprentice, Bram, stood before the ancient wooden crossing known for generations as the last bridge of hope. It was not merely a name. It was a promise and a warning. The bridge arched over a narrow, turbulent ravine, fed by unseen underground streams. Its wooden planks were warped, its ropes frayed, and its posts carved with symbols of protection older than the village itself. Generations of Hollow's ancestors had nailed charms onto the railing. Silver tokens, dried herbs, feathers dipped in consecrated oil, iron shards from broken swords. Every charm told a story of someone who survived. Or someone who didn't. Elmira inhaled deeply. No matter how much she tried, she couldn't ignore the feeling that the air here was heavier, charged with the residue of countless final stands. "This is it," she whispered. "This is where the curse can be broken, or sealed forever." Bram hugged himself. "And you're certain the bridge weakens his strength?" "The Headless Horseman," Elias replied, "cannot cross a threshold protected by ancestral oaths. His power falters on sacred boundaries. It's why he must dismount, why he cannot ride freely beyond certain points." He paused, tightening the silver-threaded rope around his wrist. "But this one is special. This bridge was built directly above the Hessian soldier's burial runoff." Elmira's eyes widened. "His remains flow beneath this ravine," Elias confirmed. "His body was scattered after death, but the soil here absorbed the blood. Everything comes back to this place." A sudden rumble shook the earth beneath their feet. Not thunder hooves. The sound came rolling like a storm, echoing from deep within the twisted path behind them. The trees trembled. Birds burst from their nests, fleeing into the night. The torches flickered wildly, struggling to hold their flames. "He's close," Bram whispered, voice cracking. "He's coming." Elmira grabbed the boy's shoulders. "Look at me. You must not run. He hunts those who flee." The horseman thrived on fear, its scent, its sound, the flutter of a desperate heartbeat. Running was an invitation. Elmira needed the boy steady, or they would lose more than their chance to save the pan-dyed Bessie-ass missing son. They would lose Bram, too. Elias stepped forward, planting the silver-tipped spear into the soil near the start of the bridge. Its surface hummed faintly, responding to the curse it was created to fight. "Elmira, the ritual, prepare it, now." Elmira knelt at the foot of the bridge, laying out the witch's old grimoire. The candle infused with wolfsbane, and the vial containing the final ingredient. A single drop of Hessian blood preserved across centuries. Obtaining it had nearly cost them their lives. Using it might cost even more. Another thunderous crack tore through the forest, and then silence. The kind of silence that suffocated. Elias lifted his lantern. "He's here." Fog slithered across the road like a living thing, curling around the roots of trees and the edges of stones. It coiled toward them in slow, deliberate movements. And then, from that suffocating haze, a towering silhouette emerged. The Headless Horseman. His armor clinked softly, though every step sounded like a hammer against steel. His horse snorted flames from its nostrils, steam rising from its flank like smoke from a blacksmith's forge. The rider's missing head still dripped spectral embers, flickering like the final glow of dying coals. And in his hand, gleaming with death, was the legendary sword that had felled armies. Elias stood firm, but Bram wavered. The horseman pointed his blade at the boy. "Do not look away," Elmira barked. Bram froze, clutching her sleeve. The bridge behind them creaked as if urging them onward. Elias took a single step between the monster and the child. "You betrayed your oath," he said through gritted teeth. "You gave your soul to darkness for revenge. Tonight, we end that bargain." The horseman's armor rattled a sound halfway between laughter and disdain. Elmira struck a spark to the candle. Its flame ignited with a strange violet glow. The monster reacted instantly. His horse reared, screaming. His blade was drawn back, fiery runes spreading across it like spreading cracks. The horseman charged with terrifying speed, the earth trembling beneath the violent force of his approach. "Elmira," Elias shouted. "Begin the incantation." Elmira opened the grimoire and screamed the first line over the roar of hooves. By blood unjustly taken, a blast of air struck her, knocking the book from her hands. Pages scattered across the grass like dying butterflies. "No, no." The horseman surged forward, inches from cleaving Elias in two. But Elias leaped back toward the bridge. The monster followed, until his horse's front hooves touched the first plank of the sacred crossing. A shockwave exploded outward. The horseman howled, recoiling violently as sparks of white-blue fire erupted along the bridge rope, racing through every charm, every sigil, every ancient prayer embedded within its wood. Elias turned, sweat dripping down his brow. The boundary holds him barely. Elmira scrambled to gather the scattered pages. They needed the ritual. They needed the final incantation. Without it, the horseman would break through the weakening protection. And once he did, Sleepy Hollow would fall. The horseman paced at the threshold of the bridge like a caged beast, slashing the air, carving burning scars into the earth. Elmira clutched the final torn page, the one containing the last words of the spell. "We can do this," she whispered. "We still have hope." Elias nodded. "Then let us use it." Behind them, the bridge groaned as though warning them that hope wouldn't last long. The bridge shuddered under Elias's boots as he steadied himself, planting the silver-tipped spear into the wooden planks. The boundary still pulsed with faint, flickering light, but each wave was weaker than the last. Elmira, clinging to the final torn page of the grimoire, could feel the protective magic wearing thin like old fabric stretched to the breaking point. On the other side of the threshold, the Headless Horseman prowled, pacing like a starving predator denied its prey. His horse snorted plumes of burning ash. His armor groaned under the weight of centuries-old rage. And though he no longer had a head, a soundless fury radiated from him, an oppressive silence, so heavy it smothered the air. It was the silence of the dead, the silence of a curse that had lingered too long and refused to fade. Elias exhaled shakily. "Elmira, whatever we do, we must do it now." Elmira dropped to her knees at the center of the bridge. Bram clung to her cloak, trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. "Do not look at him," she whispered. "Not even for a second. Fear feeds him." But it was impossible not to feel the horseman's presence. Every breath trembled beneath it. Every heartbeat struggled against it. This was no longer the chase, no longer the hunt. This was the moment the curse would choose its master. Elmira unfolded the torn page. The ink shimmered with a faint crimson glow, the dried blood of the Hessian warrior, the blood that had anchored the curse centuries ago. Elias tightened his grip on the spear. "Read it, Elmira." But Elmira hesitated. There was something wrong. The page, it shook, not from her hands, from the words themselves, the spell. "It's not just a banishment," she whispered. "It demands a sacrifice." Elias's jaw tensed, whose Elmira swallowed hard. "The living blood of one who carries the weight of the hollow," Bram gasped. "No, you can't. Minot wants a soul tied to this land," Elmira said quietly. "Someone born here. Someone who has walked these woods and lived under the shadow of this curse." Elias stared at the boy. Bram stared back. Then Elias shook his head. "No, absolutely not." Behind them, the bridge rope snapped violently as the horseman slammed his blade into the boundary. Sparks exploded in all directions. The horseman reared back and struck again, and the protective fire guttered like a dying candle. Elmira forced herself to speak over the roar. If we do nothing, everyone dies. If we choose wrong, the curse will take Sleepy Hollow forever. The sky growled with a low, hollow thunder, though there were no clouds, no storm. Just the echo of the horseman's wrath spreading through the heavens. Elias stepped closer to Elmira. "Give me the page." Elmira's eyes widened. "Elias, no, I am the one who dragged us into the forest. I am the one who uncovered the truth of the Hessian. I carry this guilt. Let the hollow take me." The horseman went still, as if listening, as if waiting. Elmira grabbed Elias's wrist. "The spell isn't calling for guilt, it's calling for lineage. You aren't from here." The truth hung between them like a cold wind. Elias could not be the sacrifice. Elias's expression collapsed. "Then who?" Elmira looked down at Bram. The boy stepped backward, shaking violently. "No, no, please." Elmira knelt before him, holding his face gently. "Bram, listen to me. No spell can force a soul. You must choose. Only you can end this." The horseman's horse screamed, rearing as flame burst from its hooves. The boundary's light flickered to almost nothing. Elias gripped the spear so hard his knuckles whitened. "Elmira, there must be another way." Before Elmira could answer, Bram did something none of them expected. He stood. He wiped his tears, and he stepped toward the center of the bridge. "Bram," Elias shouted. "Stop." But the boy's voice, small yet unwavering, cut through the chaos. "My father always said, a smith's son must learn to forge his own path." He looked at Elmira with tear-filled eyes. "And if my brother is out there somewhere, I want him to live. Let me do this." Elmira trembled. "You are braver than any warrior of this hollow." The horseman roared silently across the threshold, raising his cursed blade high. The force of his rage blasted through the bridge, snapping ropes and sending dust spiraling. Elmira thrust the page into Bram's hands. "Read," she whispered. "I will guide your voice." Bram nodded. He began the incantation. Each word cracked through the air like lightning. Each syllable carved through the cursed silence. The horseman recoiled, the fire of his armor dimming as the ancient blood in the spell pulled at his essence. Elias planted the spear into the ground, channeling the last remnants of protective magic into the boundary. For a moment, just a moment, the horseman faltered, and in that sliver of hope, Bram read the final line. The ravine exploded with light, a blinding column that rose skyward, ripping through fog, shadow, and centuries of hatred. The horseman's armor cracked. His horse screamed. A distorted, echoing howl like the cry of a soul being dragged back into the earth, thundered across the hollow. When the light faded, the horseman was gone. The fog lifted, the wind stilled, and Sleepy Hollow exhaled for the first time in centuries. But Bram, he collapsed into Elmira's arms. "Bram," she whispered, shaking. "Bram, stay with me." His heartbeat faded like a final echo swallowed by the night. Elias fell to his knees beside them. "No, Bram." Elmira held the boy's hand to her chest. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, his spirit flickering. But in the distance, a faint voice echoed across the ravine. Brother, the missing son, alive, calling out Elmira's tears mixed with the quiet wind. Bram had saved him. Bram had saved them all. Yet the silence that followed, a silence born not from death, but from sacrifice, was unlike anything Sleepy Hollow had ever known. It was the silence that would never end.